In this screencast, we're going to start to talk about Chapter 8, which is on energy and enzymes. So let's start to talk about metabolism, because that's where everything gets interesting. So metabolism is the complete and totality of any organism's chemical reactions. You've heard somebody has a fast metabolism, a slow metabolism. Those things may or may not really exist, but when we're talking about metabolism, we're talking about every chemical reaction that occurs within an organism, okay? And because metabolism transforms matter and energy, metabolism is subject to the laws of thermodynamics, which we're going to get to, which you hopefully have already learned in physics. All right, metabolism occurs in pathways. Okay, so the chemistry of life is organized into metabolic pathways. And the reason there are these multi-step pathways is very similar to the pathways in signal transduction, so that signals can be amplified and controlled. So a metabolic pathway begins with a specific molecule and ends with a product. And every successive step in the pathway is catalyzed by a specific enzyme, a very specific enzyme that can only catalyze that step. So if we look at a pathway, here we have our starting molecule, molecule A. The first reaction converts A into B, and it's catalyzed by this enzyme. Our second reaction in the pathway takes B, which is called an intermediate, because it's not the product, so it's in between. So the second reaction takes B and converts it into C. It's catalyzed by a different enzyme. And again, enzyme 2 can't catalyze the first reaction, and it can't catalyze the third reaction. It can only catalyze its own reaction. Okay, C is another intermediate. And then finally, C is converted to D, and D is our product. So that would be the last step in the pathway. And of course, it has its own enzyme as well. There are two types of metabolic pathways. The first type is a catabolic pathway. Catabolic pathways release energy by breaking down complex molecules into simpler things. So catabolic pathways break stuff up. Okay. Cellular respiration is an example of a catabolic pathway. It takes the molecule glucose and breaks it down into carbon dioxide and water, and that's an example of a catabolic pathway. Okay. The other type of metabolic pathway is an anabolic pathway. And anabolic pathways build things, build stuff. Okay. Catabolic pathway, you're breaking it up. Anabolic pathway builds it. So anabolic pathways, because they're building something, they consume energy. Okay. And they build complex molecules from simpler ones. So the synthesis of a protein from amino acid monomers is an example of an anabolic pathway. So let's talk about energy for a bit here, because we just talked about anabolic, catabolic pathways. Catabolic pathways release energy. Anabolic pathways consume energy. Energy overall, and this should be some physics review, is the capacity to cause change and to do work. Okay, and so energy exists in various forms, some of which can perform work. So let's look at those. Again, this should be review. Kinetic energy is the energy associated with motion. Heat energy is random movement of atoms or molecules. It's a kind of kinetic energy. Potential energy is energy that matter possesses because of its location or structure. So it's kind of stored energy. Chemical energy is a type of potential energy that is available in a chemical that can be released during a chemical reaction. So kind of like the energy stored in glucose. Okay. And energy, of course, can be converted from one form to another. And I believe this helps me segue into, a little diagram, then we segue into the laws of thermodynamics. So if you talk about potential energy, so you have a diver up on a platform, because his position is a higher energy position than the swimmers in the water, he has more potential energy Okay, and these guys have low potential energy. Okay, the diving itself converts potential energy to kinetic energy, so that releases the energy. And climbing up requires energy, so it's going to store energy. Okay, so a little graphic there. So now let's move on to the laws of thermodynamics. So thermodynamics is the study of energy transformations. Okay, isolated systems are isolated. They're pretty. If you put like liquid in a thermos, that's an isolated system. It contains the energy. Open systems, energy and matter transfer between the system and its surroundings. It flows through them. And every organism is an open system. We exchange matter and energy with our environment. So if we look at the first law of thermodynamics, we know this as the law of conservation of energy. And its energy can be transferred and transformed, but can neither be created nor destroyed. Okay, this is review. So second law of thermodynamics, and this is the kind of, poor half-sister of the first law. Everybody knows the first law, but not everybody remembers the second law. Hopefully you do. And it has to do, again, with energy transfer. If we transfer or transform energy, okay, some of it is unusable and is lost as heat. And this plays into our second law of thermodynamics, which has to do with energy transfer. So every energy transfer or transformation increases the entropy of the universe. Okay, and entropy is the measure of disorder, right? And heat energy is very disordered. Okay, and so when living systems are converting energy, a large amount of that energy is lost as heat. And this is because we have to follow the laws of thermodynamics, and the heat loss helps to increase entropy. Okay, so here we look, here's the bear. First law of conservation of energy, chemical energy in the fish going into the bear so he can run around. And then when the bear runs around using the energy from the fish, he consumes that energy, and a lot of the energy is lost as heat. And that increases the entropy in the universe. Okay. So again, we can't avoid converting organized forms of energy into the disorganized form of energy, that is heat. Spontaneous processes, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in the next screencast as well, I believe, can happen without energy input. They don't require, so like diffusion is a spontaneous process because it doesn't require an energy input. If spontaneous processes, for a process to occur without energy input, i.e. to be spontaneous, it must increase entropy. When we're kind of decreasing entropy or going towards order, that's where we have to put in our energy. And so again, if we're increasing order, and that's what basically cells are. They spend a lot of time increasing ordered structures, building organelles, building molecules. That increases order, okay? So we take less ordered structures and change them into ordered structures, okay? And we also do the reverse. We take ordered forms and replace them with more ordered forms. So we kind of do both. So energy flows into an ecosystem in the form of light and exits in the form of heat. So we flow in to light in the plants with photosynthesis, and exits from all organisms as heat lost from all organisms. And here's an example of some order. If you look at this shell or this beautiful aloe plant, it's very ordered, and that requires a large input of energy. But the process of doing so, and then the energy it takes to maintain that, okay, helps, is releases heat. So again, the evolution of complex organisms, although it seems to violate the second law of thermodynamics by making things more ordered, it actually does increase the total entropy of the universe. So the entropy in the organism decreases, but because of all the lost heat, the entropy of the universe increases. So the universe is happy. Does that make sense? So as we increase entropy in an organism, a lot of the energy we put in is lost as heat. That heat increases the total entropy in the universe. All right. So that's it for now. And we're going to move on to talking more about metabolic reactions in the next screencast.